Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing the latest Micro ATX case from DeepCool, the CH370, which comes in both black and white, and the white version that I have here is currently on sale for less than $60. So it's not an MSRP, it's actually selling on Amazon today for less than $60. So if this case turns out to be any good, it's going to be an absolute bargain. So let's dive in and take a closer look. The tempered glass side panel is magnetically attached. It just needs to be pulled out from the top and then it can be lifted away. At the front of the case there's a hidden headset holder. All you need to do is push on it and then it springs out into place and you can hang your headset on it. The other side panel is held on with two captive thumb screws. Once these have been loosened, the panel can be pulled backwards and lifted away. Taking a look at our front I/O, we've got a power and reset button. We've got two USB Type A ports and a combined headphone and microphone jack. On the top of the case we've got a magnetically attached dust filter which can simply be pulled away. Just before we remove the front panel, the design in the square cutouts is adjustable. There's a little button at the bottom which, if you free it up, it changes the design of the front panel, and you get two different settings here. To remove the front panel, all you need to do is pull it off from the front. And if we take a look at the back of the front panel, there's an integrated dust filter. At the front of the case, you can fit up to 3 120 or 240mm fans, or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. On the top of the case, it's up to 2 120 or 240mm fans, or up to a 240mm radiator, while at the rear of the case, it's up to a 120mm fan or radiator. And DeepCool have installed the case's one and only included case fan. It's a plain black fan without any RGB on it, and it's got a 3-pin fan connector, so you're going to have to run it in DC mode rather than PWM mode. You can also mount up to two 120mm fans on the power supply shroud. You're going to set your fans on top of the power supply shroud and then use long radiator screws to screw down into the power supply shroud. The only slight issue I can see with this is, as this is a Micro ATX case, your GPU is already installed quite low near the bottom of the case, and if you add two standard thickness fans below it, it's almost touching this GPU. In terms of motherboard support, as we've mentioned, this is a Micro ATX case, so it will accommodate a Micro ATX motherboard or Mini ATX motherboard. If you prefer to go with a CPU air cooler, you're going to be able to fit a pretty large air cooler in this case, up to a maximum height of 165mm. At the rear of the case, we've got 4 horizontal PCIe expansion slots, and in terms of graphics card support, it's up to a maximum length of 320mm. Another really nice feature that we've got in this case is a GPU support bracket. We've got two captive thumb screws in the back you need to loosen, and then you're going to be able to slide the GPU support bracket up into place, and there is some padding on it to prevent it damaging your graphics card. Moving into the rear compartment, it's good to see we've got cutouts in all the right places, but given this case's budget price point, there's no rubber grommets included. Again, there seems to be plenty of cable tie down points, and we've got plenty of cable ties in the case accessory box. The case has two dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounts. They've got these little rubber pads on them, and all you need to do is screw 4 standoffs into the back of your SSD, and then you're going to be able to simply push it into place. At the bottom of the case, there's a hard drive cage. It is movable and removable. We've got 2 screws at the bottom we need to remove, and then the hard drive cage can be pulled towards you. There's 2 positions for the hard drive cage, so it can be moved slightly further towards the front of the case, or you can remove it altogether. In the hard drive cage itself, you're going to be able to fit a 3.5-inch drive, and then on top of the hard drive cage, you can fit either a 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drive. The case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 160mm, although if you remove the hard drive cage like I've done, you get absolutely loads of space for your power supply and associated cables. If we take a look at the back of the case, there's no removable power supply bracket, so you are going to have to install your power supply from the side before screwing it in at the back. Taking a look at the bottom of the case, we do have a dust filter over the power supply's intake, but it's just simply a sheet of mesh. So what I want to do now is give you a look at the build I put together in the case. So I think you'll agree the build looks absolutely stunning, but what about the temperatures? So our i7-13700K idled at 33 degrees and it reached a maximum 91 degrees during a 10-minute AIDA64 stability test. The tough gaming RTX 4070 Ti idled at 31 degrees and reached a maximum of 71 degrees during the stability test. In terms of average noise levels, these were 34 decibels at idle and 54 decibels under load. So in terms of the temperatures, there's no surprises here. They're really what I was expecting. We've got a 360mm AIO at the front set to intake, so the CPU temperatures are actually pretty good for the AIDA64 stability test. During gaming, the temperatures are likely to only be in the 60s, so miles away from what we're getting in this really extreme test. GPU temperatures were up a little bit to what I've got in some other cases, but that's not a big surprise because our only source of air for this GPU is the hot air coming through the radiator. And normally this GPU would again sit in the mid 60s. So it is up about 5 or 6 degrees, as you'd expect with the AIO at the front bringing hot air rather than just fans bringing cooler. But temperatures are very, very acceptable for such a small case. So now I want to come on to any issues I had during the build, and in general, this is actually a pretty easy case to build in. You can potentially create a few problems for yourself with going with an AIO at the front, and in general, having the AIO at the top would be a little bit easier. To go on to explain this, I suppose some of the issues that I had with the AIO at the front are, the first thing is it's actually quite a tight fit getting the 360mm radiator into the case without any fans on it. So I would try and get the radiator into the case if you're going with it at the front without installing the fans first, because I think if you had the fans on it, it might actually be too tight to get it to go in with the motherboard in place. The other thing, if you do want to do it that way, it might be worth putting it in at the start before installing your motherboard. But I think motherboard in the case, getting the AIO with fans on the radiator might be quite difficult. The other thing you want to factor in is, do you want your fans first and then your radiator, or your radiator and then your fans? And again, that depends what you want to have showing on the inside of the case. Some people will want the fans if they've got an AIO with RGB on it showing at the front, others won't. So factor that into your decision making. The other thing to factor in is the case is actually fairly short, and if you've got your power supply and a lot of cables, actually having the cables up against the radiator is not going to create any problem. But if you have your fans on the inside, there's potential for those cables to go into the fan blades. So again, that's just something to think about. The other slight issue that I had with having the radiator at the front was it did limit the fans at the top of the case. And I actually wasn't able to install these fans over the standard fan mounting slots, and I had to use the square shaped holes at the top of the case to actually screw the fans in further towards the back. So if you are going with the radiator at the front, you may have some difficulty with fan placement at the top. I wouldn't have any problem fitting one 140mm fan, but even using the non-standard fan mounting holes, there was no way to fit two 140mm fans with the AIO at the front. And the reason for that is just the tubing on the radiator blocks the fans getting into place. And you can't install the tubing with the tubes at the bottom because the cutout just isn't big enough to allow the tubes to come up towards the motherboard. The final potential problem you might have if you want to go with the AIO at the front is getting your graphics card into the case. This graphics card I only just about managed to fit in, and I did have to turn it sideways slightly to get it to go into the case. So if you were going with a bigger graphics card, factor that in because you might actually struggle to get it into the case with an AIO at the front. The final issue I had with the build was you can't really see the fans at the top of the case. The Lian Li Unifans have lovely lighting effects on the side, but you can't really see them. So I think if I was building in this case again, my recommendation would be to go with a 240mm AIO at the top and fans at the front. That way you're going to fill the space at the top of the case better. You're going to be able to see your fans that wee bit better. Hide the cables at the top of the motherboard, and again it should improve your GPU temperatures without the AIO at the front, and you're going to have a whole lot of an easier building time in the case and have more compatibility for a bigger GPU as well. The only slight reason to do the build that I've got is if you've got a really hot CPU and you want to get the best CPU temperatures, you will get much better CPU cooling with the AIO at the front set to intake, particularly because you can go up to a 360, whereas a 240 at the top set to exhaust, the temperatures will run much higher. In terms of cable management, this was really good. There's loads of cable tie down points in all the right places, plenty of cable ties in the case accessory box, so I had absolutely no problem cable managing in the case, even though I had used cable extensions in the build. So this brings me on to what I liked about the case, and the first thing I like about this case is the looks. I think it looks absolutely stunning, and it really looks like a much more expensive case. I can't believe you can buy this case for less than $60. Build quality is also really good throughout, and you're getting a lot of features in the case that you wouldn't expect to at the price point. The fact that you've got the headphone holder at the front of the case, a GPU support bracket, and the adjustable design on the front panel. Another thing I liked was that it was a really easy case to build in, so if you were planning on doing your first build, I think you wouldn't have any trouble in this case. And in terms of cooling support, it's really good, up to a 360mm radiator, or with an hour CPU cooler up to 165mm in terms of height, so you should be able to cool some pretty premium hardware in this case. So now I want to come on to the things I didn't like about the case, and some of these may be a little unfair to mention given the case's budget price point, but I am going to mention them for completeness. So certainly for a PC case for me, front panel Type-C isn't really an optional. It's something that I need when I'm plugging in my video editing drives. So its lack of it, I'm not really surprised it's not here given the price point, but it would be something that would make me think twice about going for this case and paying a little bit more money for a case that did have front panel Type-C. Another side issue for me is the fact that the case officially supports a 360mm IO at the front. You're going to have to install it with the tubes at the top because they're not going to fit at the bottom, but unfortunately the slots for the fan mounting at the top of the case doesn't actually work for two fans. You're only able to use the official fan mounting slots to install either one 120 or one 140mm fan. So I think DeepCool really should have factored this in and just changed the location of those fan mounting slots so that when you did have your 360mm IO at the front, you were able to use the official slots at the top of the case. In terms of fans, again, I can see why there's only one fan included given the case's budget price point. But again, you are going to have to go out and buy fans for the front of this case. There's almost no build that you can do that you're just going to be able to manage with this rear exhaust fan. So you are going to have to factor that in to the price of the case, the fact that you are going to have to go out and pick up additional fans. However, on the topic of fans, I'm not a big fan of DC powered fans with 3-pin connectors. I would much rather have PWM fans. But again, given the case's price point, it's not a big surprise that the fan has a 3-pin connector on it. While we're on fans, I didn't think the bottom fan mounting locations were going to be particularly useful to you, because if you do have a big powerful graphics card that you are want to provide extra cooling to, the two fans at the bottom are almost touching the graphics card, and I have tested this previously and found that having the fans so close to the graphics card will actually hurt your temperature rather than helping them. And if you do have a smaller graphics card, which is going to be further away from the fans, again, you probably don't need any additional cooling for it. Some people might be wondering about low profile fans that are 15mm thick rather than 25mm thick. Again, I've done the testing with these. They are significantly louder than the standard 25mm fans. And although they do cool the GPU because they're further enough away from it, they will add significant extra noise into the build. The other thing you have to factor in that one of the fan mounted locations is going to be mostly blocked by your power supply. So I think the fan mounted locations at the bottom aren't going to be that useful for most people, but well done to DeepCool for including them as an option because somebody will really want to have them. And what DeepCool have done as well is they've included the screws for mounting the fans at the bottom, even though this is a budget case. So you're not going to have to go out and buy extra screws, which some other budget cases have done with bottom fan mounting slots. Last thing to mention in this section is there's no rubber grommets at all in the case, and I didn't expect to find any given the case's price point. But DeepCool have done a good job of designing the case. Even with the lack of rubber grommets, you can't really see through to the back and see all your cables at the back. And with the radiator at the front, you can't even see the power supply cables at the bottom. They've done a really good job in designing the case. So even though there's no rubber grommets, everything looks nice and tidy. So this brings me on to, should you go out and get this case? And at less than $60, this case offers incredible value for money because you're getting a case that looks really good has a lot of features that you wouldn't expect to get at the price point, has a really good build quality, and should offer a really easy building experience. So in terms of a good looking Micro ATX build, this is probably one of the best Micro ATX cases that I have reviewed. Again, there is a few important features missing. The biggest one for me probably is the front panel Type-C, but if you are looking for a more budget orientated case, I don't think you're going to do better than this one, and I can 100% recommend it. And factoring in the price for what you're getting, I would imagine come the end of the year, this is likely to be my Micro ATX case of the year, even though we're only in March. But we'll see what the rest of the year brings, but this is a really good option for you if you're looking for a budget Micro ATX build. So hopefully you have enjoyed this case review. I have importantly made a full step-by-step guide to building in the case. If you're thinking of going out and getting this and doing a build, you probably are going to want to check that out. And if you have enjoyed this review, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.